you know, from an archaeological point of view, stone circles were in place in pre-Druidic or proto-Druidic times. So when people in Britain first woke up to the reality of all these stone circles around them in recent history, they incredibly thought that the Romans had built them. That was one theory, and they were, breaking up. They used to light fires around them to break up the stones and to use them for building materials and so on. So there's a complete lack of appreciation of them until William Stukely, the first archaeologist, Stukely, the founding father of archaeology, went and surveyed them and drew them, and he proposed the idea that they were the temples of the Druids. And so people accepted the idea that they were Druid temples right up until really the 20th century, when historians and archaeologists started to say, well, hang on a minute, the Druids were the priests of the Celts came over in about 500 BC, they stopped building the circles in about 1000 BC or 1500 BC, therefore there's a gap of half a thousand years, so they couldn't possibly have been built by the Druids. So certainly from the sort of middle part of the 20th century onwards, the suggestion that stone circles had anything to do with Druids was laughed at. It was ridiculous. However, what's happened now is our understanding has become a little more sophisticated or deepened, and that people have realised that it wasn't a question of the Celts invading the British Isles in around 500 BC. Instead, it seems that there's a process of what we call layered Celticity. In other words, that populations, there weren't these incredible breaks in populations, there was just general movement, and therefore the idea that there was some continuity of religious practice from the pre-Druidic era, the megalith building era, through to the sort of period of classical Druidry that was talked about by the classical authors. The idea that there was some continuity now is being more and more favoured. So the idea of Druids celebrating in stone circles is no longer ridiculous from a historical point of view, because there's no connection. And the reality is that for the last 200 or 300 years, Druids have been celebrating in stone circles. So even if we say, okay, the Druids didn't build these in the old days, well, the fact is, since the period of the Druid revival in the 17th and 18th centuries, Druids have been worshipping them in stone circles. In the Royal Welsh National Eisteddfod, they have been building stone circles since the 19th century and so on. And people are building stone circles today. So every year, a stone circle somewhere in Britain is probably being built. So future archaeologists will have to puzzle over the fact of whether this stone circle was built in the 21st century or in the BC period. So the question is, why are people doing this? And of course you discover why when you go into one and when you do a ceremony in a stone circle. It somehow seems to create this perfect environment. It's almost like a kind of primal church, if you like. If you think about what a church is, or a temple is, it's a place that is created to optimize worship. It's a place to gather people in, and because it's circular, it works with this primal idea of circularity, the circularity of the horizon, of the eye, of the planet itself, of the sun and the moon. And all the ideas associated with circularity, like inclusion, equality, coming together, harmony, all these sorts of ideas are embodied in the shape of the circle. And if you've ever worshipped in a rectangle and then worshipped in a circle, you'll know it just feels different. So, for instance, the easiest way to find that out is if you're giving a talk to 20 or 30 people or something like that, or in a teaching situation. It feels so different if you arrange the chairs in a circle and you talk to everybody in the circle, rather than having them in rows where you're talking to people behind each other and so on. So that kind of dynamic is taking place. Now, whether that's just psychological and social, if you like, or whether it's energetic is an interesting question. If it's energetic in the sense of if somehow a flow of divine energy or of human energy is facilitated by being in the circle, then that's another reason for why it's important. In addition to that, not only is it delineating that space, but it's also made up of these great blocks of stone rooted in the earth. And one of the mysteries, I think, that a stone circle teaches is that in the densest of matter, spirit still exists. So if you ever sat and leant your back against one of those old stones and meditated or prayed, you can sometimes have the most extraordinary sensation of it becoming a gateway, if you like, or the fact that this seems such a hard block of stone, if you like, it's the most material thing you can imagine, is actually filled with spirit. And of course we know now from physics that although it appears to be solid, in fact the space between the electrons is actually vast, so there's actually much more space there than stuff. So this kind of paradox of dense materiality, and of spirituality and vast amounts of space is expressed in the actual building materials. And then in addition you have, of course, the fact that it's open to the sky. And so you're worshipping in a stone circle, you're sitting or standing in a stone circle, and the roof of the temple is the open sky, hopefully blue and sunny like today, or filled with stars. I remember the first ceremony I did in Stonehenge, there were 33 of us, and we drove through the densest fog that we'd had for years. It was so thick we were having to drive at about 15 miles an hour because you could only see a few feet in front of the car. We got to Stonehenge, we processed into the centre of Stonehenge, and then stood in a circle. And as we stood there and we chanted the Arwen, which is the sacred word in Druidry, which means divine blessings or inspiration. As we did that, the fog just rolled apart and just stayed like that. And there were all these stars glittering above us. We did the ceremony, we were there for about an hour. And when we finished, we chanted the Arwen again at the end. And the fog just rolled back. It was just lovely. Yeah. So Druids come together in stone circles or in sacred groves, which are another place of meeting, which are clearings in the forest, which again create this similar feeling of a space in which to meet that is circular, if you like. Again with the sky as the canopy, but instead of stones standing there marking out the sacred space, you have trees, which are similarly rooted in the earth, live beings.